God, I come to you today just as I am. I know I don't always get things right, but I want to grow. I want to be the kind of person who doesn't just hear your word, but lives it out every day. Today is tough. Help me see challenges as a chance to grow, not as something that gets in the way. Give me the strength to find joy in hard times, knowing that you're using them to shape who I am and make my faith stronger. I know I don't always think before I speak, and sometimes my words hurt more than they help. Forgive me for those times I've been impatient or quick to anger. Teach me to pause, to listen, and to respond with love and grace. God, I want my life to show the kind of faith that makes a difference. Let my actions reflect the love I say I believe in. Help me show kindness to those who need it most, especially the people who feel overlooked or forgotten. Lord, as I try to live out this faith, I ask for your strength. When it's hard, give me the courage to keep going. Let my life be a reflection of your goodness and love. Amen.
Well, I don't know about you, but I never get tired of baptisms. And it's just been an incredible week because, as Pastor Steve mentioned, Wednesday night at our refuge service, we had 5 people get baptized all weekend long in every service. In Skagit, people being baptized this morning, and just so excited to be able to be a part of what God's doing in people's lives. Such a great time. Hey, glad you're here today. Those of you online, thank you for worshiping with us. Last Wednesday, I meet with a group of guys every Wednesday morning. We meet at 6 o'clock at 6 a.m. at a coffee shop. We're usually the first ones there, so we get our spot, and we kind of this little quad discipleship group. But for the fall, we decided to put our material on hold so that we could do the small group questions that many of you are doing as well. And as we were sitting there, they have over the speakers just some ambient music going. You usually kind of tune that out. We were discussing things this last Wednesday, and my ear caught the song that was being played. It was a song that I remember from my prepubescent years. It was a song that I first heard on an AM transistor radio. The call letters were 62 KGW in the Portland, Vancouver area. And I heard the song, and I'm thinking, that song's like 50 years old. I can't believe it. And as they're playing it, I'm hearing Carly Simon singing, "You're so vain. You probably think this song is about you, don't you, don't you?" And something about clouds in her coffee, which was fitting in a coffee shop. And as I was thinking about that, I remembering back to my childhood and that song and the angst that it brought to me. And I interrupted these guys. One of them was talking something about when people are in a group but don't listen to them. I don't know. I wasn't paying attention. But I said, guys, you hear this song? This is what my sermon's about this weekend. And they said, well, are you going to play it on your guitar? I said, no. It's about, you're so vain and the vanity. And I remember as a 10, 11, 12-year-old being confused by this song when I actually listened to the words that you're so vain, you probably think this song is about you, but it actually is. And this brought about this enigmatic paradox, this conundrum, this existential crisis in my life, because she's singing, you probably think, because it's true, so you don't have to be vain to think that. You have to just listen to the words and recognize. And it was like, how can this be that she would say this? Because it's obvious. Now, with that whole thing, the disequilibrium that this song brings about, the same kind of enigmatic paradox can happen when we talk about this topic. When we talk about, when we study, when we teach, when we try to understand about pride and humility. Now, let me try and illustrate it this way. Hypothetically, don't do this, don't raise your hand. But if I were to say today, hey, if you really wrestle with pride in your life, could you just show me your hands? Don't do it. Just show me your hands. Now, some of you, in your mind, you think, well, I don't. Okay, which is usually an indicator that actually you do, because it can be very blinding. C.S. Lewis said, if you think you're not conceited, you're very conceited. So if you think you don't have pride, you probably have a great deal of it. Some of you would not raise your hand. You would think, yeah, I have some pride in my life, but if I raise my hand, everyone will see me and they'll think that I'm a pompous, self-centered jerk, so I'm not going to do that. And it's your ego and your pride that keeps you from raising your hand. And some of you would say, no, I wrestle with pride, and you would put your hand up, and it would exacerbate the problem because you would say, at least I'm honest, like on those other people who are self-deceived and lying right now, and so you become even more prideful that you're showing that you're prideful. And some of you would say, yes, I deal with pride. How could I not? Look at me. Look at my life. I mean, some of you are old enough to remember that song, oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when you're perfect in every way. Can't wait to look in the mirror because I get better looking each day. And so you're going, yeah, of course. What's not to like about me? And the other side would be the same. If I said, okay, if you feel like you've really grown in or kind of like nailing this whole humility thing, would you raise your hand? Now, if you said, I have made some strides, and yeah, I think I'm more humble. By raising your hand, it's a self-refuting vote of confidence. By raising your hand, you're showing how non-humble you are, so it kind of cancels it out. Or if you say, well, yeah, no, if I raise my hand, then there's that, and then there's all this. You see the tension with this whole thing of pride and humility. Think about if you had to stand in front of hundreds of people and talk about it for 40 minutes. If I come up here and say, I want you to know before we get started, I really wrestle and struggle with pride. Well, suddenly I've lost all credibility to speak with any kind of authority whatsoever. Or if I said, hey, by the way, I'm really excited because I've been studying this, been learning, I've grown a lot in this, and I really think I've nailed this one. I am the expert on humility. At that point, again, it's self-refuting. And if I come up here and say, well, I was going to say I'm prideful, but that would look like, maybe I don't have any kind of credibility. But then I was going to say if I was humble, then I wouldn't be prideful. And so I said that, and it's like this false humility, like maybe if I point these things out. Can you see that? Can we just close in prayer? You see the tension that we live with this whole thing of pride and humility. So where do you go? But see, this isn't new, though. Well, I tell you where you start. You start with Moses. I mean, some of you know Moses in his life. You saw the movie. I mean, he was born to this poor family in slavery, just about lost his life, but by the providential divine hand of God, he's sucked out of the Nile River, and he's put into this situation of wealth and privilege and all of the education and everything you could ever want for. And then because of a poor decision on his part, he goes and spends decades in obscurity. And then as an 80-year-old man, God taps him on the shoulders and says to him, let me show you why I created you in the very first place. And then God uses him, and God does some things and has Moses have this ability to do this leprosy hand trick thing and take his staff and do this snake staff deal. And then because of his openness to being used by God, brings these 10 plagues. Then he delivers the Israelites who have spent 400 years in slavery and captivity. They come up against the Red Sea. He parts the water and splits that, goes on the other side. They're thirsty. He hits a rock and water pours out. He goes up under the very presence of God on Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai when there's thunder and lightning and smoke and fire and all this trembling, and he stands before God. He's given the 10 commandments. And he's credited with writing the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and his life was played by Charlton Heston. What a guy. Arguably the greatest individual of the entirety of the Old Testament. And yet, Numbers chapter 12, verse 3 says, now Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. Only problem? That's in the Pentateuch, which he wrote. Now, that's probably why it's in parentheses. It was probably added later. It may have been true, but you can't say that about yourself. He may have been the most humble person, but you can't say, hey, I just want to add this in. I'm the most humble person on the face of the earth. You can't do that. It's like he's so vain, he probably thinks this sermon's about him. Listen, we're so vain, we probably need a sermon about this. I'm so vain. I probably need a sermon about this. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to look at this topic, this slippery, elusive, kind of insidious topic of pride and humility. John Stott said this, in every area, in every arena of our spiritual development, in every facet of our spiritual discipleship, in our spiritual journey of growing, of maturing, of becoming more like Christ, in every area of us finding and following Jesus, pride is our greatest enemy and humility is our greatest friend. Now, that's a strong statement. That if we're going to follow Jesus, to know that pride is our greatest enemy, what we battle against, the one that's working against us, And humility is our best friend, our best advocate, the best one that comes alongside of us. I mean, pride, as I said, can be very deceptive. It can be blinding. We can be very prideful and not even recognize it. It can be very insidious. And the interesting thing about pride is that the reason it's the enemy is because every other sin finds its roots in pride. The first sins find their roots in pride. In church history, this list isn't in the Bible, it comes from the scripture, but in church history, there's a list called the 7 deadly sins. Maybe you've heard about it. It's not like in the Bible, some chapters, like here's these 7 deadly sins. 7 deadly sins. The very first one is pride. Not just because of its chronological order, but because of its prominence in every other sin. That is at the root. But with humility, which is this slippery, elusive thing, because about the time you think you've got it, if you realize that, then you lose it and it's gone again. Humility is the root from which every other virtue and beauty flows out of. So with that being the case, we ought to be very aware and very intentional about working towards eradicating the enemy of our souls, eradicating pride out of our life, and constantly pursuing and cultivating humility in our lives. In Greek mythology, there was a Greek god named Narcissus, very handsome young god, and according to Greek mythology, that his parents had been told he will live forever if he never realizes how handsome he is. And one day, as the story goes, Narcissus is thirsty, and he comes to a pool of water to drink some water. And as he looks into the pool of water, calm and flat as it was, he sees the most incredibly beautiful image he had ever seen in his entire life, not realizing it's his own reflection. But he falls in love with this handsome, beautiful person like he'd never seen before. And even though Echo comes to try and lure him away, he will not leave. And every time he reaches for this beautiful person, it disappears. And he stays there and he won't leave as he's fallen in love with his own image, so much so that he stays by the pool of water until eventually he dies. That's the story of Narcissus. That's where we get our name narcissism or narcissist. Now in Greek mythology, there's a goddess as well. Her name is Nemesis. And Nemesis, we've heard that word. This is my arch nemesis. Nemesis was a goddess of punishment. But the punishment for Nemesis was to punish those who were filled with hubris and pride and arrogance. And I was thinking about that taking a page from Greek mythology, don't worry, we will get to the Bible. Taking a page from Greek mythology, that we need to have a nemesis, an inner nemesis, to battle our inner narcissist. To have something that will go against that prideful side within each one of us. And when it comes to pride and humility, I mean, it's not just a faith-based thing. It's not just a church religion thing. In our world, we love and extol the beauty and the value of the virtue of humility. I mean, forget the Bible. In our world, we want that. Years ago, 25 years ago or so, Jim Collins came out with his probably greatest work of all time for him, called Good to Great, a business book, not a faith-based book, not published by a Christian publishing house. This Good to Great was this book on leadership and business principles. And in Good to Great, he talks about leadership and level 5 leadership, which he would put at the top. So here, at this point, he's not much of a follower of Jesus, admittedly on his part. He is today seeking Jesus and following him. But at that point, as a professor, as a social scientist, he said one of the things that causes leaders to be at this level 5 leadership is humility. This is a business leadership book. And later he would write several other books. One of them was How the Mighty Fall. And when he talked about why is it that those that were at once at the top of their field would fall, one of the reasons is because of this hubris brought on by success. That because things went well, that there gets to be this pride and this arrogance and an unwillingness to learn or to innovate or to look at these telltale signs around them. This is from the leadership business world. About 7 years ago, there was a book that came out. Again, not from a Christian author, it's from a couple of professors. And it's entitled, Humility is the New Smart. And it was talking about business in our world today. So this isn't necessarily just a faith thing. Our world sees the beauty of humility. But in the faith community, absolutely. I mean, Scripture, absolutely, as we will see. There's a book written about 140 years ago by Andrew Murray. Great little book. I highly recommend it. You probably get it on Kindle for next to nothing. It's by Andrew Murray. It's called Humility. So you don't have to write that down. What's the title of the book? There you go. And it's about 140 years old, but it's very readable and very just great insights. Well, about 20 years ago, C.J. Mahaney wrote a book, another real readable little book, and it's called Humility. So you don't have to write that down. What's that book called? Humility. Yeah, okay. So you got Andrew Murray's book, Humility, and C.J. Mahaney's book. And then about 12 years ago, there was a professor from Australia. His name is John Dickson, and he wrote a book, a real readable, good little book, and it's called, no. It's called Humilitas, which is Latin for humility. Yeah, so, and these three books, I would highly recommend. I own them, I've read them, I'm the expert on humility. I know all there is to know about humility. Okay, they're really, really good books. In fact, drawn from all three of them for this sermon today. But what's interesting, what I love about John Dickson's book, Humilitas, is that the other two, Andrew Murray and C.J. Mahaney, they both come to it from a slant of Scripture. Dickson does not. He will land on Scripture, but he comes at it from a side of history and examples and social science and psychology. And what he points out is that in the history of humanity, while today in our Western culture especially, we put a high value on humility, that has not always been the case. And then he begins to point it out. In the 6th century BC, there was a piece of work, a body of work called the Delphic Canon. And in the Delphic Canon, one of the things, amongst others, one of the things that was listed there was a list which was seen as the sum and the substance of an ethical life. If you want to live an ethical life, this is what it looks like. And there's 147 maxims, these little statements, these little character traits. This is what it means to live an ethical life. And what he points out is that not once in those 147 is there even a hint of the theme, let alone the word humility, because it wasn't seen as a value. Now, I would think today, you ask anyone, put together a list of 10 of the best quality traits of the ethical life, humility would make everyone's top 10. It didn't even make the top 147 back then. And when Aristotle comes along, Aristotle saw that there was an unfortunate need for humility, but only in two circumstances. Humility before the gods, and humility before someone like a king or an emperor or someone above you. But Aristotle would say, if you show any humility with someone who's on an equal playing field, equal plane, equal social economic status, and especially if you show any humility towards someone who's lower than you, that was seen as this weak, insipid trait, that it would be a horrible thing to have. And not only was humility seen as a negative thing in ancient history, but pride and arrogance was seen as a very positive thing. Before Augustus died, he wrote a 2,500 word document that was supposed to be emblazoned in bronze and put on his tomb, and it listed off all of the accomplishments he had done while he was the emperor. And no one cringed at all, because that was seen as a very beautiful, positive thing. So Dickson asked, what is it that changed the course of all human history on this? Why is it that humility used to be seen as a negative trait and pride used to be seen as something positive, to where today, while we may not practice it, at least we want to believe that humility is more beautiful and pride is more ugly? And he takes it historically, not biblically, historically, and he lays out a case. Oh, I would love for you to read the book. He lays out this case where the thing that turned the tide in all of human history on this topic was a Jewish rabbi who began to teach differently about humility, who lived a life that exemplified humility. And while that began to turn the tide, the real change happened because of his death and how he died. And he builds the whole case around the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, the most humiliating thing, and how his followers dealt with the fact that their God would be humiliated and crucified, that changed all of human history on how we view humility. Well, that Jesus had a little brother. Now, some of you are saying, I was wondering if we were going to get to the book of James. We're there. Jesus has his half-brother, this little brother, and he writes about how is it that we live in our world in a way that is reflective of what we believe. And in James chapter 4, which I told you last week, we're going to be in James chapter 4. In James chapter 4, he confronts this very issue. And now, it is possible at times that I have a lot of words on a Sunday morning, and so we're not going to be able to cover everything in James chapter 4. We're actually only going to look at two verses that for some of you are very familiar, and two verses that are on the surface look very simple. And our prayer has been, we prayed with the elders yesterday, with the pastors this morning, is that the simplicity of this and the familiarity of this would not in any way hinder us from understanding the absolute essential importance and significance of this topic. So, two verses. Ready? Good. I heard no one. This is a very humbling moment for me as a pastor. Okay, so I'm going to go, whether you're with me or not, that's good. We're glad you're here. Have a nice nap. James chapter 4, verse 6, and it's going to start in the middle, because remember, can't cover it all. It picks up like right in the middle. He starts with the word but, James 4, 6, but he gives us more grace. That is why Scripture says. Now, James is going to pull from an ancient literature. He's going to pull from something that was written 1,000 years earlier in the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 34. He's quoting Solomon. He says, that is why Scripture says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Now, in typical Old Testament parallelism, you see these commonalities. There's God on both sides. There's people on both sides. There's responses. There's an attitude on both sides. There's a compare and contrast of these two things. But what we find is the thing that differentiates them is this attitude of pride and humility. And pride and humility, these two things are the catalysts to God's activity in our life. Both of them will cause God to respond. Both pride and humility will evoke a response from God. It'll just be different, depending on which way we go. Now, I don't want to spend a lot of time on the pride piece, but it's worth hitting for a moment. And before we get to the verse, again, we understand, we get this. We understand how pride, when you see someone or hear someone or experience someone that is just so self-absorbed, so full of themselves, just so egotistical, so arrogant, it's kind of off-putting. It's just kind of like, oh, yeah, wow, that just, there's just something inside of us that there's a cringe factor. A little over a month ago, I was at an event with 6 friends, and we were going to listen to this keynote speech from a woman, and I'll say this right up front. She's an endurance athlete that has done things that I'm like, how is that even humanly possible? I mean, honestly, the list of things that she's accomplished is just like crazy town. I mean, it's just like unbelievable. So we're all sitting on the second row. And we're getting ready to hear this woman give her keynote speech. And so she begins talking, and she just begins to go through this list of accomplishments that she's acquired, that she's done. She said, well, I did this, and then I did this. And immediately it's just kind of like, whoa, yeah. And then she says, and I've got the fastest known time for this, and I was the first woman who accomplished this, and I'm the first person that ever did this alone, unsupported, and on and on. And we had this group of us, 7 of us, just the day before had made a comment, had been having a discussion about narcissism. We're all sitting there, we're all on a text thread, and someone starts texting. Now, we had our ringers off. This was a good thing because we're on the second row. Started texting about, do you think she might be a little narcissistic? And then it started, and we're on the second, that's why you people on the second row, you are not allowed to have your phones out when I'm preaching. We're down there, and we're trying to keep from laughing. We missed everything she said because we're talking about this. There's just something about when someone is tooting their own horn, it's just like, oh, it's just so off-putting. We get that. The ugliness of pride. And it doesn't take long to just logistically think through the diminishing returns of having a prideful life. If you are prideful, you're not going to be open to new suggestions. You're not going to be curious about other people's opinions. You're not going to collaborate real well because you've got it all figured out. You know it all anyway already. And all those things are true. But worse than that, worse than the off-putting cringe factor of someone who's arrogant, worse than the diminishing returns, James points out what Solomon says that's even worse. That God opposes the proud, Now, usually we read that and we think, oh yeah, the proud, some group over there. But if it's true that we all deal with pride, could that be here? It doesn't say that God just ignores the proud. There's an active response that God opposes the proud. Chad Veach, who's a pastor at LA, he said about this verse, when he hears that, he thinks about the Heisman Trophy. I mean, you know the Heisman Trophy. You know that whole deal. The whole picture is this, that God has his grace, God has his blessings, God has everything he has for you, but when it comes to the pride, there's a stiff arm. It keeps you away from what God has. There's an active opposition. But the beautiful thing is that there's a response for God for those who are humble, that he gives grace. It doesn't say he gives grace to the smartest. He gives grace to the strongest. He gives grace to the most educated, the grace to the most religious. He doesn't say he gives grace to the most needy of grace. He gives his grace to those who acknowledge their need of grace, realize that, and seek it. That he would give that grace to the humble. Now, I'm going to be honest, because some of you are saying, no, this is a nice topic, because in our mind we think, humility and pride, he's right. This is a pleasant thing. It's really nice for us to be more humble. I had to work on a little bit of that. And we miss how the intense priority that this is for God. He doesn't think that it's a pleasant way to live. He says it is the gateway to his blessings and his life. Of how important it is, crucial, it is absolutely essential. In Isaiah 57, we see this picture, beautiful picture of our transcendent God who is wholly other, beyond us and all of creation. In Isaiah 57, verse 15, it says, "For this is what the high and lofty one says," this one that is above and beyond. "He who lives forever, the eternal one, who always has been and always will be, who doesn't change, the same yesterday, today, and forever. He is the one who lives forever, whose name is holy," this holy name. And he says this, "I live in a high and holy place." Well, yeah, of course, he's so other, he's so beyond. He says, "I live in a high and holy place." But he doesn't stop there. And then he goes on, he says, "But also with him who is contrite and lowly in spirit." Our transcendent God, who is so beyond, says, "I am out of touch for you, unless you're humble. And that's where I dwell, with you." In Isaiah 66, he takes another stab at it. He goes at it this way in Isaiah 66:1. "Thus says the Lord, heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. After a long, hard day of running the universe, I come home and I put my feet up on the earth. It's my ottoman." That's why I just kind of kick back there. I'm so above all this. So he asks the question, what is the house that you would build for me? I mean, you really think you can build something that I will live in? Do you not understand? I put my feet on the whole earth. And what is the place of my rest? You're going to have a nice little place where I can have a timeout. All these things my hand has made, and so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. You see what he's saying? Like, I don't get impressed with your big buildings. The truth, I do. I mean, I've been able to see some incredible cathedrals. If you've ever been to Rome, to the Vatican, if you've ever been to St. Peter's Basilica, I mean, it is unbelievable. The size of the magnitude. You get in there, and I've said this before, but in the dome area, you could fly an airplane in that building. It is that big, this wide open span and the beauty, and then having like the Pieta right there. I mean, it is impressive. And then you go across the courtyard and you go into the Sistine Chapel where Michelangelo's ceiling that he laid on his back and the fresco across the ceiling. I mean, it is absolutely impressive. In 2018, my wife and I were coming home from Spain. We got to spend a few days in Paris, and there we got to go through Notre Dame before it burned down, which we didn't start that fire. Just want to make sure you're clear on that one. But to see this building This cathedral, this sanctuary is just awesome. Some of you have been to Barcelona. There's the Basilica de la Sagrada Familia. This church building, they started building it 140 years ago, and they're still not done. I mean, it's spectacular. And God says, all these houses that you try to build for me, you think that's impressive to me? And they're all right if you're into that kind of thing. It just doesn't do it for me. I'm not impressed. He says, you know what stops me in my tracks, though? Not your big cathedrals. You know what catches my eye? You know what turns my head? He says this, but this is the one to whom I will look. He who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. You want to know what God says? Okay, now this is worth looking at. Okay, now this one, hold on. Come look at her. Hey, watch him. It's the one who's humble. I mentioned C.J. Mahaney in his little book. What was the title of that book again? Not humidity. Humility. All right. In this book that C.J. Mahaney writes, he's talking about this Isaiah 66 passage. And he points this out, and I thought this was a great way of phrasing it. Talking about God, it says, nothing escapes his notice, but one thing gets his attention. Nothing escapes his notice. He's omniscient. He is all-knowing. He is all-seeing. One thing gets his attention. See, I was raised with the first half of that statement. Nothing escapes, his notice. I mean, I grew up singing a little song, oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. Be careful, little tongue, what you say. Be careful, little feet, where you go. For the Father up above, anyone sing this? Is looking down in love. So be careful. Be careful. Scared me to death. He's seeing everything. It's the Father. Nothing escapes his notice. He sees it all. As I got older and later, understanding the beauty of this, that he knows everything about me, everything, and still loves me. Psalm 139, where he says, he searched me and he knows me. I mean, he knows when I sit down and when I stand up. He knows my going out and my lying down. He is aware of all my thoughts before I even think them. Before a word is on my tongue, he knows it completely. He surrounds me behind him before he's laid his hand on me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's too lofty. How can I attain to it? Where can I go to flee from his spirit? Or from his, if I go to the heavens, he's there. If I make my bed in the depths, he's there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn or settle on the far side of the sea, even there, he's there. His hand is holding me and guiding me. And if I say, well, I'll hide in the dark, he says, even the darkness is not dark to our God. And then he goes one step further. He even saw you while you were being formed in your mother's womb. Nothing escapes his notice. He notices everything. But one thing gets his attention. It's a humble heart. It's a life of humility. Now, I said we're only going to cover 2 verses. We've only gotten one done, and I'm 32 minutes in. So we got to hurry. We got to keep moving. All right, so if that's the case, if God opposes the proud, gives grace to the humble, then we ought to be pursuing and cultivating humility in our life. So we're going to have to skip some verses, read on your own. It kind of ties in, it ties into all this, but we don't have time for it. We're going to jump down to another verse that for some of you is very familiar because it's a verse that you sang in Sunday school and youth group. And it was kind of around in a minor key. He says this, James chapter 4, verse 10. He says, humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. You remember that song? We could sing that song, humble yourself in the sight of, humble yourself in the sight of, and he will lift. You remember that whole song? It could be like an aerobic song. Okay, never mind. So he says, humble yourself. Some of you look at me like, what is he doing? It's a song. I'll teach it to you later. He says, humble yourself. Humble yourself. This is such a key point here because it's our work. I think I was in college when it struck me that the list referred to in Galatians as the fruit of the Spirit, that humility was not on that list, and it struck me as odd. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. No humility. And then I began to think, well, maybe that's because the fruit of the Spirit is the transformation that the Holy Spirit is doing as we cooperate with Him. It's a co-op deal that His power, our willingness, submission, we are being transformed. But humility is not something that the Holy Spirit does. It's something we choose. And we're on our own with this one. And we get to decide. Do you know, nowhere in Scripture does it say pray for humility? It doesn't. So we get this false idea of what humility is about, and like, wow, that means I got to just kind of be down on myself, self-loathing and hatred. I'm no good, and I'm a worm, this and that. No. He says, that's not what we're talking about. Humble yourselves, he says, before the Lord. I think it was Andrew Murray in his book. He says, when you come before the Lord, you disappear. When you begin to truly understand the majesty, the holiness, the righteousness, the love, the justice, the grace, the mercy, all of who God is, when you see Him in all of His fullness, there is nothing but humility before our great God. So we humble ourselves there before Him. Now, we don't have to do that. But we make that choice at our own peril. Now, if we had time, we'd go into Nebuchadnezzar's life. Let me just summarize it real quick. Nebuchadnezzar was this king, very successful, a lot of accomplishments. He had been warned, don't be so full of yourself and don't be filled with pride. He ignored the warning. One day he's on the top of his palace. He's looking over this city that he's built. He says, I built this city. I built this city on rock and roll. He looks at this city and he's filled with pride, and he's been warned, don't be full of yourself. And he goes into this season of absolute humiliation. We won't have time to go into all that, but this season of absolute humiliation until he gets to the point where he realizes, I don't have to live this way anymore if I will just look up. And this is his response on the other side of that season. Daniel chapter 4:37. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just, and those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. You don't have to humble yourself. But I think Nebuchadnezzar would say, I've experienced humility that didn't come by my hand. And I would highly recommend that you humble yourself instead of seeing what kind of humble nature God can bring about in you. It will be a lot less painful if you choose to humble yourself for the Lord. Did I mention that James has been influenced by his brother Jesus in this series? Yeah. Well, again, you see this. This verse that he writes is something that has an echo of his older brother. Jesus said this in Matthew 23, verse 12, for whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. And Peter heard that, and I think Peter dealt with pride. I mean, he felt it was incumbent upon him to give some instructions to Jesus one day. And Jesus gave him a nickname that day. Get behind me, Satan. It was pride in the upper room when Jesus said, you're all going to abandon me. And Peter says, not me. These other slackers, yeah, get it. We know. Jesus, you and me, I'll never do that. I'll never deny you. So sure of himself. And a few hours later, he's weeping bitterly because he has denied his Lord 3 times. He learned some things about pride and humility. He remembered the words that Jesus had said, and maybe he was even influenced by the words that James wrote. Because when he writes his own book, 1 Peter, it says this, all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. Because, and he quotes Proverbs 3 as well, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And then this sounds a lot like Jesus and James. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. Same thing, same words. But Peter adds a word. Peter adds this word. He says, clothe yourself. Can I mention, you guys all look fantastic today. You've clothed yourself well. Very nice. I don't know if you, as a husband or a wife or a parent or a child, ever came out and someone in your family says, you're wearing that? That's not a vote in your fashion prowess. It's like, why would you wear that? Are you kidding? And James says, I want you to pick what you're going to wear, and it's going to be the most beautiful wardrobe. I mean, Paul does it again as well in Colossians chapter 3 when he says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, and humility. It's the most beautiful wardrobe that we can choose. And so we choose daily, hourly, and for the rest of our lives. What am I going to clothe myself with today? Every day we choose that. And I said hourly because this elusive thing of humility, it's just so slippery, it goes away, that it may be something we have to choose over and over again, and it may be something we are choosing for the rest of our lives. To be dressed in the beautiful wardrobe of humility. Now let me just point this out again real quick. Humility, biblical, true humility, is not self-loathing and putting yourself down. If I'm saying, I'm no good, I'm awful, I can't do this, I don't have, who is the subject matter there? It's me. I'm still at the center, even in my putting myself down. That's not what it's about. Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 11, verse 29, take my yoke upon me and learn from me. We talk about finding and following. Jesus says, follow my way. Follow how I do this. For I am gentle and humble in heart. Do you think Jesus put himself down? Do you think Jesus dealt with self-loathing? Absolutely not. Jesus knew exactly who he was, knew exactly the purpose that he came for, knew it all, and in that he could choose to be humble. So when I talk about us cultivating humility, it's not putting ourselves down. As C.S. Lewis said, humility is not thinking less of ourselves, it's thinking of ourselves less. It's just, don't even think about you. And to follow Jesus, to follow the confident humility of Jesus. In that incredible passage in Philippians chapter 2, where it says in verse 5, your attitude, our attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. And then look at the confidence. Who was in very nature God. He knew who he was. The Godhead, the divine one, very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. He made himself nothing, taking the nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found as a man, he humbled himself. He humbled himself and became obedient to cross, the very thing that changed the tide of all human history on humility. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place, gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. You see that? It was in his confidence of who he was, and his purpose, that he could lay down his rights. He could say, not my will, but your will be done. He could wash the dirty disciples' feet. He could serve and touch the lepers. He could include those who were far from God. He could humble himself in great confidence. Okay, now I'm out of time, so let me just finish with this. Micah chapter 6:8. This is another one some of you grew up singing. He has showed you, oh man,